Okay, I think that everybody can see us now. So welcome to the next lecture in the NeuroTalk series. It is my pleasure to host Jonathan Hacker, the founder and CEO of NeurGear, a neurostimulation company that develops cutting-edge ultrasound technologies. And currently, NeurGear is creating a wearable device designed to enhance focus and memory. Today, Jonathan will deliver a lecture on neuroentrepreneurship and the vagus nerve, bridging neuroscience and business innovation. We encourage the audience to ask questions in the comment section. So thank you once again for joining us, Jonathan, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I will actually update one thing. We made a pivot around a year ago from focus and memory off to stress and wellness and stress resilience. That was I'll go over it in the course of this talk and the whole decision behind that, because that was a very hectic time for the company. But we're actually on market today. It's a headset. You wear it. It stimulates your vagus nerve with ultrasound. It's called the Zen Bud. If you look up ZenBud, you can find us. And yeah, so anyways, I suppose we get right into it. How we're going to structure this is I'm going to give a little bit of overview of my background, how we got to this point, a little bit on the vagus nerve as well, to give you guys a bit of background on how that works. And then after that, I really want this to be more freeform. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments while I'm speaking, and we'll start talking about them after the lecture gets to that point. Okay, if we're all ready, I'll get into my background.
Yes.
So, perfect. So I knew that I wanted to get into neurotechnology when I was around 11. This first started actually with a obsession with some sort of full dive virtual reality apparatus. I really wanted to see something come into play that was not invasive, that could do something in that realm. It's been a long time looking at different stimulation technologies, which would be the backbone of whatever that would end up becoming. Came up with a new one, which is proprietary, so I'm not actually going to speak about it. But we did eventually end up pivoting to ultrasound and realized that ultrasound brain stimulation, back in, I believe that was that 2021 when we made that switch to ultrasound brain stimulation for performance. So where the performance thing that you got actually was from, because we actually were doing that for a while, and that was very interesting to develop. I'll talk a little bit about the issues with transcranial ultrasound stimulation for consumer end products. For medical end products, there's a ton of potential, but very frankly, you need fMRI to get any decent amount of targeting with most focused ultrasound devices. And with unfocused ultrasound devices, the effects are very non-consistent. Especially when you're talking about brain stimulation, because your brain is not mapped exactly the same way for every individual. It's all approximations, which can cause very big issues when you're doing brain stimulation. But anyways, we pivoted out of that actually and into vagus nerve stimulation around a year back. We made some really good additions to the team, including our CTO, Stanley Stevenson, previously retired. We brought him out of that, which, big tip, if you can bring a very experienced engineer out of retirement, do it. They typically know 90% of the problems you're going to encounter along the way, and they'll be able to help you through that. Plus, a lot of times they don't care about money because they just want to do it because it's interesting. So find the very bored, very experienced engineer in retirement and bring them out of it. That is legitimately the biggest hack you can possibly come up with. But they helped us build the product is what it is today. We have a very strong team around it. And we are currently raising our pre-seed round. We've made some revenue already. As you may notice, the device is on market. People are purchasing it. But really, the pre-seed round is the next step, which I can also talk about that whole fundraising process if people are interested in it. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the vagus nerve before we get to any questions that have popped up so far. But the vagus nerve is actually responsible for your rest and digest response, otherwise known as your parasympathetic response. A good way to think about it is your autonomic nervous system, or the nervous system that you don't actively control, is one way of thinking about it, is split into two systems. You have parasympathetic and sympathetic. Sympathetic is more consistently known as the fight or flight response. If a bear is trying to eat you, you are in a sympathetic state because you are trying to not be eaten by the bear. Your heart starts racing, you get ready, you're pumped for action. Parasympathetic is on the other side of the aisle, where it's legitimately responsible for all the rest of the time. It's responsible for your base state, signals from the brain. Now, if you actually go into the parasympathetic system, there's something called your vagus nerve, which is responsible for around 70% of the fibers of the parasympathetic system in the body. The vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve as part of your peripheral nervous system, as opposed to central. Central being brain, spinal cord, peripheral being everything outside of that. And so what we do is we stimulate the auricular branch, or the branch located right around here in the ear, next to the subconscious region, in order to activate your vagus nerve and thus activate your parasympathetic system. And a lot of the effects that people notice and the calming effect that they get when they use our device is because that particular branch is basically feeds into the locus coeruleus on the brainstem and interacts with something called your HPA axis. Now, I know I've been talking about a lot of very specific terms on neuroanatomy side, so if people want me to dive into anything more particularly, I'm happy to. If they want to hear less of that, just let me know. I can give a much more general, broad overview. But essentially, what this whole interaction lets us do is it lets a user put on a headset and feel calmer from it. And that's what you tell people. I need to make this clear. Everyone here, if you want to get into neuroentrepreneurship, has spent a lot of time in the science. Or if you haven't, you need to. Because you need to have some of the best understanding at whatever startup you're building in the neurotech realm of anyone in the field of how your technology works, why it works, how it interacts with different things. Because you're going to get asked every question underneath this darn sun, and you're expected to answer it intelligently and immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could say you don't know, but that loses you a lot of credibility with time. But ideally, you should know it, and you should know it well. So one of the ways that you can do this is by studying the literature. Become the expert, in other words. And you need to be if you actually want to succeed in this field. That's just how it works. Now, one of the very interesting things is once you've gone into the science, once you've become the expert, you now have to learn yourself to be no longer be the expert. You have to unexpert yourself in your language, because while you have done all this research, 99.99% of the Earth's population hasn't. And if you're selling a product that wants to be sold to more than 0.001% of the Earth's population, you need to talk in a language that they understand. So I just pitched you the science side. Now let's revamp that pitch into something that most people understand. It's a headset. You put it on, it makes you feel calmer through your body's own systems. That's what most people are going to care about. Very frankly, everyone else is not going to care about all that lovely neuroanatomy stuff, except for the experts that talk with you. You need to be able to talk with the experts. You need to be talking with everyone else as well. Past that, I would say that there is a strong neurotechnology is hard tech. What this means is there's like a humongous difference within startups between software and hard tech. And particularly, even inside hard tech, you have easy hard tech and deep tech. Neurotech is hardware deep tech. It is some of the hardest type of technology to build a startup around. Even Elon built Palon before he did Neuralink, if you look at that chain. There's a reason for that. He actually suggests people follow that type of chain because software is so much easier. Software, you can build revenue almost immediately. There is no back-end cost. You don't have to build inventory. There's almost no cost of goods sold past you just got to sell it. You just has to be something that people need to use, which is why the marketplace is inundated with apps that no one cares about, because everyone and their mother can build an app. There's no code tools now. There's all of that. But to do neurotech, you first off have to be able to build hardware, which means you need engineers, which are very expensive, either equity-wise or salary-wise, or alternatively just even time-intensive-wise. You need to build product ergonomics. You need to build packaging. All those have to be done. Once you've done all of that, you then have to be able to explain your technology to the common consumer. You have to educate them. You have to build up an understanding of what the technology is, and you can't overload them with terms that they have no familiarity with. Especially if the technology you're trying to build hasn't already had some traction in field, this becomes even more difficult. Now, there is the medical side of the equation, which works a little bit differently from most startups, but it's also very hard. Medical is more of a who you know type situation. If you don't know the right funders, seed stage, you're not going to be able to raise like the $5 to $7 million you're going to need in order to hit the medical side. And you're going to need at least $5 to $7 million in most cases. Now, I say all that. We did not follow the medical side. We followed the consumer side. And we bootstrapped this with around $75K of founder investment in total and past that revenue. And we did that over the course of a year. How did we do that? And how can I help you guys do the same? First off, you don't have to spend 75K to make this work. What you need is some sort of MVP, something that does what you say, even to a low degree, and you need someone that is genuinely interested in that, and you need to talk to them. Conferences are a great place to build out your advisory boards on that note, and they're going to have connections to other people that might be interested in either helping fund you or know grants, et cetera, that can help get you past those early stages. Um, for example, Neuroergonomics Conference. I believe that's happening in, is it a month or so? Anyways, there's a bunch of different in the space. Go to the ones that are most closely related to your field and talk with the people there. Get advisors for the board. Everyone loves being an advisor title, and as long as you're, especially if you're younger, you can leverage that because people want to teach young people. Because someone taught them when they were young and helped them get to where they are today, they want to pass down the favor, and they're not going to. Don't let them charge you for that. If they're trying to, they're probably not a good fit for your advisor. Um, so that's on the advisor side. On the funder side, that's really hard. It's just you just have to spend probably typically for a raise of this size, you're going to do of any size in the current market. You need to spend at least 6 months to a year. And frankly, you're going to want revenue of some sort. And when going into that raise, you want a product, you want production lines. You're going to need basically to have all your ducks in a row. And you're going to want to at least have 2 years of pitching and accelerator experience in the current funding markets. I mean, when you have booms, it's a lot easier than this. But right now, you're going to also have an undervaluation of your company. I don't say this to discourage you, but just if you can't handle that, then don't try the fundraising route. Go government tech, go med tech, work for a university, have them pay you to develop the technology. But if you want to go directly into industry, you have to have your ducks in a row and expect to spend a lot of 80 to 100-hour weeks getting your ducks in a row for probably close to a year at minimum. If you have the right connections ahead of time and have already built those, you can do it in around a year. Past that, it might take close to 2, maybe even 3. So that is a very short overview. Have there been any questions so far in the comments?
Well, I do have questions. Like, firstly, like, did you have to get an FDA approval or something like that?
So in the United States, we have something called general wellness products, which means if you are extremely low risk and you do not make claims about an indication, you are not regulated by the FDA.
Mhm.
We fully intend to go into the medical markets down the line and make claims regarding PTSD, anxiety, and potentially depression. Depression is always a hard one. The FDA treats that one very carefully.
Mhm.
But at the very least, anxiety and PTSD. But right now, we're not making those claims. And as long as we don't make those claims, we are not regulated by the FDA. And so we don't have to get those approvals. I will note we did decide to still go and get a CE, become CE compliant because we wanted to and wanted to sell in Europe. But we're still not doing that for MDMR. We are still a wellness product across the board. Um, and that's a great way to get early revenue and to get early traction, which in these funding markets is highly needed. Uh, it's a sad reality. Ideally, people would throw money at every promising startup they see, but in the end, imagine if you had $1 million and someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I want you to invest half of that in what we're doing." It's going to be a pretty hard sell. Now, even if it's a lot less than half, let's say it's even just 20K, they still have to convince you that what they're doing has promise. And very frankly, neurotech deep tech is harder to do that with than any other type of startup. A hardware easy tech startup, a lot easier because you can build your MVP a lot faster. You can build up revenue a lot faster. A software startup, even easier. If we're talking about the easy to hard scale, first off, easy hard scale in life is just getting a business job or a government job, all the way over to startups. And then within startups, you have software all the way over to deep tech. And within deep tech, you have AI is on the very easy side of deep tech right now. It's actually easy because it's software. But in deep tech, you have all the way over to neurotech. You're choosing to start one of the hardest startups you could possibly do. And if you're not extremely passionate about that, I would double think for a moment, go back out and see if there's anything else you're passionate about that can make you some money up front so you can bankroll the startup in the start. Because if you don't, no one's going to.
Okay. The next question, manufacturing process. I was actually thinking about it today, and I think that it's really hard to optimize everything to create like a working manufacturing process. Like those, do you have like a hole or something with all the like
It's,
robots?
Manufacturing is really hard. When you're in the early stages, get a process that builds you units, even if your COGS is through the roof. Like right now, it costs us. We're spending so much money on things that we'd be able to eliminate once we have our pre-seed round. It's ridiculous, very frankly. But we have to because we're a startup, and right now we need to build revenue numbers more than we need to care about COGS. And down the line, there will be manufacturers that will partner with you and delve into that process. Always, I would say attribute like 200K in your pre-seed raise, which should be anywhere between 1 million and 5 to deal with that because it's going to be expensive. Your manufacturing process that you build at the start will not scale, and you're going to have to spend a lot of money getting it scalable.
Mm-hmm. And are you thinking about like making it from the ground up yourself?
We do. That's actually what we do right now. We
Right.
build everything in house on this end, and I would suggest you do the same because paying
Mm-hmm.
someone else to manufacture your product in the early stages is very expensive, and there's better uses of your capital.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you have a product that can be sold because it's low risk and you're not making claims that are medical oriented, spend it on sales. Spend it getting yourself out to those conferences where people care about this. Spend it making those connections. Don't spend it on getting a third party manufacturer to make like 10 of your product. It's just not worth it. Build it yourself or find someone that you can be an intern or part of your team, whether that requires equity or not, to build it for you.
Right. And like I have a question about developing a prototype. What was first, like the idea, or first, like during university, you developed some like a prototype or something like that? Yeah.
So in our case, I hate to say it, every startup is unique. In our case, which I'm going to talk to it a little bit, we spent a long time in the university when we were there building up transcranial prototypes, and none of them very worked well. Then we poached someone from retirement and went out of their university because the university was hampering us at every stage. Every time we were trying to do something like, oh, you can't work here for whatever reason, it was nonsense. You'd think that RIT would be more love innovation more, considering that's in their marketing. But it's in reality, it's you have a couple centers that really love it, and then a lot of centers that hate it. But we went out of the RT community and we actually found this makerspace, which that's another hack. Find a makerspace, live there, essentially spend your time there because they don't care what you do. They will just want you to succeed, which you need to surround yourself with those kind of people. Plus, there's a lot of great chances for connection.
Mhm.
So we found particularly it's a Rochester makerspace where we do most of our work. And we built our product here. And we built the initial prototypes here. We built the MVP here. We built the product here. It was a great time. But not to say that university resources shouldn't be used. You should totally do that, especially with your initial tinkering and your initial development. But when you get serious about building a prototype and you have a team that can work with you on that, try to find a makerspace that's close by, especially if you're encountering a lot of resistance within the university or wherever other environment you're working. It'll be worth it. Or your garage if you don't need high tech tools. Just a space that you can devote to only working on this because that is a hack and a half.
Mhm. And how long did it take to make the first prototype or MVP?
I think it was 4 months of 60-hour weeks,
Right.
60 to 80-hour weeks in total, and which was a great time, to say the least. But it has been very interesting. Again, find people that have experience in what you're trying to do and see if they aren't at the very least willing to point you in the right direction because you're going to spend a lot of time making mistakes that other people have already made. Let them make the mistakes for you and let them tell you how to not make those mistakes and move fast even if you do make those mistakes because you only got so much time to live and you're burning the candle.
Yeah, and like coming back to like this boom, do you see neurotech boom in the future? Because like we have now, I think that right now AI is the boom.
AI is it's the popular key phrase. You have startups that have no right calling themselves AI right now because it better attracts funding.
Mhm.
That's the reality of the situation. And AI is really incredible in a lot of ways, and it actually incredibly suggests that people use it for bouncing ideas off of. It's a very smart tool for that, and or building outreach lists, and or assigning tasks. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with it to make it your assistant. So 100% would suggest that, but the neurotech boom is in progress. I expect it within the next 2-3 years. It requires a product in the space to really hit the consumer markets, because just like AI existed for decades behind closed doors in universities and some of the business to business markets, we only started to really become familiar with it once you had this really big example of success in OpenAI that became consumer side facing. It's the same thing with neurotech. There's a bunch of neurotech in universities behind closed doors and business to business environments, but there's no neurotech product that really has hit the larger market. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I can talk to those if people want to hear them. But it's really a usability issue most of the time. That's what we sought to address inside the ZenBud. And we have actually in a large way, because this is the most usable, biggest neuro device you're going to find. But there's still improvements we can make. And yeah, so a neurotech boom requires something to have already boomed. And then they'll have a bunch of follow-ons, which is usually what the boom is. The boom is a follow-on to an already successful product. And you could actually point to, as opposed to neurotech, the wearables market as a larger market for a lot of neurotech nowadays, especially consumer side. Like, for example, look at the Apple Watch. What did they make? Like $40 billion in revenue last year. It's pretty insane. They have eaten up a terribly large market cap. So people are used to wearing the Apple Watch now and all of its follow-ons. We just need the Apple Watch for this industry, which we'll get there. If a startup doesn't get there or get bought out before, they don't be the startup. But I know that Apple's looking at EEG earbuds right now.
Yeah.
That was pretty popular.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when they'll develop it. Patents to creation is a very long cycle, but eventually there will be something there on the diagnostic space, and then either before or after that, depending on how things progress, you'll have something on the more stimulation side.
So did you hear about anything other than Apple that actually could turn the market? That is because we all heard about
yeah.
Elon Musk Neuralink, but it's not really like a consumer product right now.
He wants it to be, but it isn't. So frankly, if you actually look at where things are booming right now, or where they could boom, and actually what's caused the neurotech market not to boom as fast is you always have to look where the money is going. The money is going primarily into medical neurotech startups. They may have had a wellness history, but they usually don't stay there. Good two examples are electroCore, which I'm highly familiar with because it's in our industry, and Cala Health. Those are both neurotech wearables. They were both medical oriented, though electroCore actually went into the consumer markets when they failed to get reimbursement, which that's the story, actually. You have so many companies that will raise hundreds of millions of dollars to build these products, and they do a great job of it. And then the insurance company, they get an agreement with insurance companies saying that they're going to have a reimbursement, and then they get like $100 in reimbursement. And that might sound like a lot, but typically there's a reason why hundreds of millions of dollars are being put into these companies, because they're expecting closer to 1,000. Mm-hmm. And when they get a tenth of that, like a good example is look at the electroCore stock. It used to be $30 before it's released, and then dropped down to like 30 cents because their reimbursement deal did not go through the way they thought it would. And that's a pretty consistent thing. It's actually it's a fallacy of industry at this point to expect reimbursement for a neurotech wearable of anything greater than probably $200 until things grow quite a bit. There's a reason why our price point's at $500 right now. It's low enough for consumers to use, and eventually when we end up getting reimbursement, if we ever do for this, which I have my doubts on whether that's going to change with insurance companies anytime soon, we're prepared. Even if it's $250, or even just 100, that's still enough to cover a large portion of our cost. And that'll still make it more attractive to consumers, especially if we have a strong consumer side. Because again, consumer markets are where the boom is going to happen because insurance markets are holding things up on the medical side. I suppose that's the short answer is insurance companies are not reimbursing these products. And so it's really hard to attract investment until they start doing that. And so if you can't attract investment, it's really hard to build something big.
So do you actually think that insurance companies and this reimbursement is the must for the
it's not a must. I mean, there's a reason why we're operating the company we are, because we're not relying on that. We are a consumer product, and we will grow as a consumer product as far as we can, which could be rather large. I mean, frankly, there's a whole other problem of, especially in the wellness space, a lot of people claiming things that don't work, that work a certain way. That's humongous. But when you're talking about a product like what we're doing here, we are actively stimulating your system, and you see a pretty darn strong effect. And so when people use it, it's a pretty easy sell because it's like, hey, I just felt calm. I haven't felt calm in the last 3 days because I've been focusing on XYZ. I don't care how much you charge me. So that's a pretty common thing that we see, and I think that's kind of the thing that will drive this industry is consumer products like ours. And of course, I'm biased here saying this. There's a reason why we're doing the things the way we are. Will be a consumer product like ours, particularly focused in the mental wellness space. We thought it'd be focused, but it just isn't. The performance gains that you see are not strong enough. And treating mental wellness or stress actually gets you higher performance anyway. So you can hit both markets at the same time. Because if you're less stressed about something, you'll work more actively on it. You'll procrastinate less. That'll lead to greater gains.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, with how COVID played out, the stress markets are at an all-time. They're as ripe as you're ever going to get. So we believe, at the very least, that we're hitting this opportunity right at its peak. But we will see. Maybe check in on us in like a year and a half, and you'll see if we're as big as we think we will be, or get on it sooner if you feel like you're in a very high stress environment.
Okay, so the next aspect, advertising, like from what I hear, like actually showing the audience or like the consumer the product, and like is the most successful like way to
What
make
we've
them buy
seen,
it.
what we've seen is that trade shows and or opportunities where you have people try these technologies works the best. And the reason for that is there's so much BS out in industry right now in the wellness space that just doesn't work. And I hate to say this way, and I'm sure it's a controversial take, but TDCS does not deliver on the promises that it gives for a lot of people, and not for everyone. And some technologies are better than others in that space. But people get this very ballooned idea of what this technology is when they hear it's neurotech, it's going to change my brain,
Yeah.
and suddenly they're expecting far more than the technology can ever provide. And that's a humongous problem. It's always better to deliver and under promise than it is to over promise, under deliver. Because when you over promise, under deliver, what ends up happening is that people try and say, this isn't near what I was promised. What the heck is this? I hate this. They leave a 1-star review, and that builds up. And so we've really taken the under promise, over deliver approach. But the easiest way still is just to show people the technology in use and have them use it. And when people use it, they understand it. And when they understand it, there's no under promising there or over promising either. They understand exactly what they're getting
Mm-hmm.
because they've tried it. So that's why we've seen the most success there, very frankly. Though we are experimenting around with advertising on a larger scale with Google Ads, Facebook. There's a couple other ones too. We're actually looking at X as well because that's actually they're offering some really great ad deals right now
Mm-hmm.
on X, which has I know that the X ads that actually show up on my feed are definitely mixed, but if we target it right, it could actually be something. But yeah, so those are the approaches we're taking right now. Though, is we found the most success with having people use it, and I think that's actually the case for almost any product. It's not just neurotech. Having people use the product means you're going to just see more sales.
Mm-hmm. Mm, yeah, I think that at that moment we don't have any more questions. Uh, so maybe you could tell us a little bit more like about the startup process in detail. If that would be
For
fine.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, again, it depends on what type of company you are, but the startup process always starts with two things. You have idea form startups or team form startups. Frankly, team form startups have a higher chance of surviving, especially if it's a very strong team. And the reason why I say this is ideas change. When I told you guys the story, I kind of glossed over it, but we had at least 4 major pivots. And frankly, the company in its current iteration is only really a year old. And the amount of minor pivots along the line is even more. So it ends up becoming extremely important that you're not so tied to a singular idea that you're going to kill the company to only do that one thing. You will destroy everything you're working for. And that's why team-led startups tend to actually be a lot stronger. If you have a very core team that you trust and that can work with you and wants to work with you to make something, that's going to beat out an idea-led startup 9 out of 10 times. So you start out with either your team or your idea. If you have the team, you then find an idea that everyone thinks is promising, usually based on customer feedback. You do something called customer discoveries or customer interviews. So you talk to a bunch of people. You're not trying to sell them anything. You're not telling them what you're doing. You're just trying to get like a, hey, what are your pain points? And once you find a pain point that's not being addressed properly, you create a solution that you think addresses that pain point. And you go back to those people and say, would this help with your pain point? They'll say yes or no. And then you'll say, how much would you pay for it? And they'll say a blank number. And then you'll say, buy it now. That's the last part that a lot of people don't get, is that people will give you false prices all the time, whether either too low or too high. Too low if you're in the wrong market, if you're talking to the wrong people, and too high if you are in the right market, but in reality, they won't actually be willing to pay that. Higher numbers are usually a good indication, though, that you're in the right place. So yeah, actually sell people something, because that'll tell you more than anything else who's really willing to buy. Because everyone's willing to be nice to this person, especially if you're young. This young person that is talking to them about this thing they're really passionate about. Yeah, I'll pay $3 billion for that. Okay, cool. I got one right here. Why don't you pay me $3 billion? Oh, sorry. No, I didn't actually. I was just saying that. And then you get them down to a realistic price. And if they don't buy it at all, it also tells you something. Because if they really have this pain point and they're really willing to pay something, they're willing to buy, even if it's unpolished. And that's actually why if you ever go to a startup incubator, they're all going to encourage you to build your MVP as fast as possible and have something to deal the issue, which is where the software advantage really comes in, because they can build an MVP way faster than most hardware companies. But you could still do it as a hardware company. It's just going to be an extra 3 months or so on the timeline. So once you've built out that idea or process, I've talked about the team side, but if you're on the idea side, you have to build a team that's strong and be willing to pivot. It's very possible to do, but build your team around you or the idea or what you want to do. Pivot the idea into something that's functional based off those customer interviews, and then they kind of merge at that point. Personally, I think the idea process time takes a lot longer than the team built company, but advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. And I know that most start with an idea. That's just the fact of the matter. So once you've done that, the next steps of the process is you need to build some sort of traction that you can go and raise money off of. So build traction and build a plan. And I'd really focus all your attention on one of those two things. If you want to build a company without external funding, you think you can, then just focus on traction alone. But in neurotech, you need capital at some stage, and ideally earlier than later. So build traction, figure out how to build a pitch deck. There's plenty of templates out there, and then go and start pitching to people. Don't ask them for money. That is the biggest mistake first-time founders make. Do not ask them for money up front. Ask them for advice on how to build out your pitch, because you need a bunch of advice. That first pitch you build is terrible. I will tell you that now so that you can stand it when other people talk to you, because they were all going to call it terrible. They're going to hurt your feelings. You're going to feel terrible about it. And you're going to build a thicker skin because you're not going to survive this industry without it. So, and after around probably 6 months of pitching, you'll start to actually go on to your raise. And that's when ideally you have some real traction on the end, because you have a team. Remember, the team's still doing things while you're pitching. And remember, you also, I'm assuming who I'm talking to right now is the CEO founder, typically. But as a CEO founder, your job is to raise money for the team and plan strategically. Planning strategically shouldn't take that much time. Most of your time should be on fundraising, and it's going to be a majority of your time no matter what. They'll take time. If you feel the need to build traction before you fundraise, you can focus your energy entirely on that, and that's what we did. But fundraising will eat up a lot of your time at a certain point. Anyways, once you've done that, you go up, you pitch to a bunch of people, you start going to things like New York Tech Week, which was last week. We were there, by the way. Start leveraging your network to find different pre-seed funds or seed funds that make sense. Look up deep tech, use LinkedIn, use PinchBook, use Crunchbase, build out an investor funnel list, find all the funds that have invested in your competitors. That's pretty big. Find other funds that have invested in neurotech in the past, because they've already done a lot of the due diligence on the technology, which is usually one of the biggest barriers for deep tech, is the due diligence on the tech. Once you've done that and you've pitched those, hopefully some bites. If not, go back and build more traction and then come back. Keep giving these people updates. Do not let them slip away because you're being lazy. And never be lazy in the startup, especially when it comes down to investor side. Once you've done that, once you build up enough traction or you've built up enough pitch experience to raise money, then you raise your pre-seed round. Your goal from pre-seed to seed is to show some sort of KPI or key performance index to raise your seed round. Typically, that's manufacturability for scale. That's building up some inventory. That's building up a lot more revenue. And if you need some sort of compliance piece, that's the compliance piece, whether it's FDA approval or otherwise, it needs to get started at the very least at that stage, so that when you come back to those same funders and first off, go back to your same funders and see if they're willing to do your seed. A lot of times they're willing to follow on if they really believe in your company. That's when you go back to them and say, we've done XYZ. We're looking to do ABC in the next phase for our seed. And now let's talk about seed. And we're going to raise. And then you repeat the same thing you did before. It's between pitching and traction over and over again. You're flip-flopping between those two until you have the money you need for the seed round. Now, the seed round, you're expanding out the team. You're probably hitting different sales targets. This is where you start to really become a small business as opposed to just a startup. And the terminology differs on that, though, all over the place. Get used to that. And so you're going to build up your team. You're going to build up your sales. And Series A plus, at that point in time, you're going to have an advisory board that can pretty much tell you what their next steps are, and you should have a good idea of what your next steps are. So I'm not really going to talk about Series A plus here. Plus, it's not where my expertise is. My expertise is really pre-seed back to bootstrap. But yeah, that's the timeline. It's going to be a lot of work. Build out a good pitch deck, build out a good product, build out traction. If you can get revenue, because that's going to be a door opener in a lot of VC conversations. Or angel conversations as well, which angels are a much underutilized resource, but people that have maybe $1 million, $2 million that really believe in the problem you're trying to solve are great funders because they also care about the problem you're trying to solve. So they want to see you solve that problem more than they want profit, which is immensely valuable in the early stages when profit is unstable, to say the least. So that would be a very, very quick overview to the process. But overall, the biggest thing is you just got to be resilient enough to not give up. I never said to stay on the same idea. Remember, you should pivot frequently necessary. Put forethought into those pivots, but you'll need to pivot. But you have to be resilient to the forces that are going to weigh down on you in this process. If you don't think you're going to be able to do that, then startups aren't the right space for you. Find a job in research or academia or otherwise where you can contribute to the field. Or alternatively, just come to it later down the line when you've built that resilience up in some sort of other position. But resilience is the number one I would also say underappreciated founder talent. You have to care quite a bit about the problem you're solving, and you have to be resilient enough not to give up.
And did you ever get rejected, like while raising the money, and then just changed something and came back, and they, like after all, agreed to give you money?
I've heard tons of stories about that, and you'll actually see that. Like for example, currently we're raising our pre-seed round, like I mentioned before. We've seen a lot of people say, "Hey, come back to us when we have around 1 million annual recurring revenue," which for a pre-seed stage company is not realistic. So in reality, they're seed Series A, even though they label themselves as pre-seed, labeling is terrible out there. You do your research on who you're contacting, but 100% we'll be reaching back out to them once we hit that number, because then we can have a conversation about if they want to be involved in the next round and put them on the investor update list and update that investor list every month, or if you have to every quarter, definitely not every year or semi-year. Just give them somewhat updates on, hey, we did XYZ over the last 6 months or 3 months. More realistically, we're going to be doing ABC in the next 3 months. See you guys later. We're going to be raising around probably in Q2 of 2025. So keep in touch. And then rinse, repeat that. Investors love that because they're able to see that you're actually working on things. They love traction. They love seeing that people aren't sitting still, and heavens, the worst thing for a startup is stagnation. Pivot over stagnation. Stagnation is terrible.
All right, but yeah, but I'm thinking about like what you said, that build team-oriented startups. But don't you think that, like after all, you should have this grand idea? Maybe it's not really like strict and it can be changed, but shouldn't there be like this grand idea behind all of this, all the startup?
So I will say this. We are an idea-founded startup. So I say this as an idea-founded startup, that the team-founded startup is stronger as far as survivability goes. The only really way that an idea founded startup works is if the founder in question that had the idea is so committed that they're willing to sacrifice almost everything else. Um, that's just the honest truth. It's not for the weak of heart or for the faint. Um, if you can do that, go ahead, do it. And I'm not saying that there's anything against having a great idea and pursuing it, but 10% of the challenge is having the idea and 90% is the operation. When I say team found a startup, I mean get your operation in order first, and then your idea can come after. But if you have the 10% first, it's fine. You just need to build the 90%. You just need to build the operational team. And that's what took us the longest, is finding good co-founders to work with is very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because 90, I hate, it's a Pareto principle. 90%, and I hate to apply to human beings, but it's also true. 90% of people are just not fit for being in a startup. They think they are, they think they want to, but they don't have the drive, they don't have the skill set, or they don't have the dedication to make it work. 10% are. So find that 10%, you'll be fine, no matter when you find them, but ideally sooner than later.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like marriage, like, isn't it? Like working with co-founders.
Oh, it is. And I mean, like, a good portion of startups die because of a co-founder dispute. So don't jump the gun, so to speak, especially when it comes down to the equity conversation. Don't jump the gun, especially if you're a CEO founder that is looking for a co-founder or looking for someone to be a first employee. Do not give equity out willy-nilly. It's your most precious resource. Treat it like you're a dragon guarding a gold hoard. Otherwise, you will have issues, and you will have tons of issues when a co-founder, like, because way back when, before the company was in its current iteration at all, we were still working on like the transcranial work. We were part of an accelerator program, and we had a team of 4. I was one of those. I was one that brought the idea into the program. No one from that team is still around except for myself, and for various different reasons. But that's just kind of how it plays out. And if I had given equity to each person on that team, uh,
Mm.
we would be in a much worse state. We wouldn't be fundable, is the biggest issue, because VCs will not fund teams that have dead equity that's not working for the company. That's just a big, big, big no-no. So it's be better for you at that point to kill the company and start over in some sort of way. I hate to say that, but you're not going to get funded in that kind of circumstance. And what you basically happens, especially when people leave, is you're working to pay someone that isn't even around. The other thing is that you also have something called vesting in a lot of startups, where equity will vest over a certain period of time. You'll do this at your seed raise. Every VC requires it. It's a good thing. It's golden handcuffs. So what they'll say is, hey, yeah, sure, you've got X amount of shares of the company right now, but they'll only vest after a year of working for the company. So if you were to leave day one after getting a funding round, you would get nothing. You leave day 90, you get maybe like 10% of your shares. You
Mm-hmm.
leave after 360 days, then you have most, if not all, your shares. Um, that kind of situation is really common, and you can do that with people you're working with on the early stages. But I would always be reluctant in giving out equity until you really know the person and know if they're committed. Because if they're not committed, you are making a terrible mistake,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a mistake companies can really come back from. You can come back from almost everything else other than an equity mistake. An equity mistake will kill your company. I've seen it happen quite a few times.
Yeah. Okay. I have another question. From what I hear, it takes a lot of time to raise money, like raise funding, and really pitch the idea. And do you like really have time to work on on science, on technology? And if not, do you miss that?
If you don't have time to work on those things, make the time. There's a reason why I do 80-hour weeks. um, so, I mean, like, because you basically do have 2 full-time jobs as a CEO founder. You have the job of, you have to raise capital. That really needs to be your priority, because once you have capital, everything becomes a lot easier. But then you have the strategic planning and tactical growth that you have to do. If you don't build traction there, you're not going to raise funding. And if you don't try to raise funding, you're never going to be able to build that real traction that you need. So it's kind of like a catch-22. And there's actually a really good book about this called The Founder's Dilemma. But it really is a dilemma on what do you want to spend your time on. I basically became a shut-in for around 6 months or so to work on the tech and the science and build it up. We got a bunch of different university collaborations. We built out the technology. We built out revenue, and then we came back to start raising money again. And there's can be something said for that if you have the padding to do that, but a lot of people don't. So it really depends on what you can do. I think having some sort of traction in science is important, but at pre-seed stage, they don't really expect you to have that. They expect you to have a good deck and a good team.
Mm-hmm.
Anything more than that will help you, which I think revenue at pre-seed stage is almost required for neurotech, but for most technologies it isn't. And if you know the right funders and the right funding environments like New York City or San Francisco, which heavens, we made a terrible mistake trying to raise in upstate New York for a very long time. They just don't have money up here, and they don't have money in a lot of rural places. So when you'll talk about like what we were doing and what we're still doing actually is like a 750K pre-seed raise. You try to do that in upstate New York, and like everyone's like, "Oh wow, that's a lot of money," because they're used to funding software startups that need like 50K or 100. You go to New York City and they're like, "Oh, I need at least a 1 million check size, please. I don't do anything underneath that in a startup." And that's what you want for deep tech because you're going to need all of that money. In fact, you're going to probably, on the note of the raise, budget enough for around 2-year runway right now. I expect that the neurotech markets funding markets are going to get pretty bad before they get better. So if you're raising right now, 2 years. If you're raising like in a year should be fine.
Mm-hmm. And like, do you think that what's the best state to actually start a deep tech startup like right now?
The best state to incorporate into, which heavens, we told our lawyers to do this and they didn't do it, and it has cost us a pretty penny to get it fixed. First off, incorporate your startup in Delaware. I know
Okay.
it's boring. It's a Delaware corp, and everyone says Delaware C corp is the only thing to invest into, though, because you can get away with incorporating it somewhere else, but it hurts your chances. It like hurts it by like maybe 5 to 10%, and you need every advantage you can get. So start in Delaware. They know entrepreneurial laws, even with the recent debacle with Tesla. I think it was Tesla, yeah, Tesla and Elon. It's Delaware is still the place to go, though Texas is jockeying for it. So year or two down the line, it might be more beneficial to be over there. As far as a place to start, next to one of the funding centers, within easy access to one of the funding centers, is what I would say. We're in New York. We're in upstate New York. It's a 5-hour drive down to New York City. That's a great funding center. It's around a 6-hour drive down to Boston. I like upstate because burn rate's very low. Taxes might be high, but when you're a startup, they incentivize you by not really charging income tax, or at least sales tax on the startup. So it becomes a lot easier. So we like upstate New York, but there's a lot of other locations to go. You just want to be an easy access of at least 2 funding centers so that you can drive down there and talk to people. Actually, we're in easy access of 3 because we're also very close to Toronto. It's around a 5-hour drive that way as well. So we got ourselves a pretty nice situation here in Rochester, but it's not the only place. San Francisco, if you can afford it, or you have someone that willing to let you live on their couch, would be the situation over there because people over there really love deep tech. They love the idea of it, although they don't always fund it. Washington, D.C., you could make it work if you're doing a lot of government work or business to government type stuff, though that's always for neurotech it's hard because everyone nowadays is saying like, oh, the army doesn't do medical research, which is a lie, but you'll get stonewalled over the place essentially is something that you're gonna have to worry about. But that's the case everywhere. You just got to get in the right doors. So yeah, I would say upstate New York is where we're doing it, and I really like how we're doing it. So I'd say upstate New York, but just make sure you're close to a funding center and your burn rate isn't too high. So don't be at the funding center; be within a drive of the funding center,
Mm-hmm.
is what I would suggest. And that applies anywhere you go in the world. Just be close to a funding center, but not so close that you're killing your burn rate. Burn rate's how much money you lose each month, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's how much you're burning on your capital that you have.
And do you see yourself changing your headquarters, like location, in the future?
Depends. There's a chance that we end up changing to a state that has more friendly taxes. Very frankly, than New York State, which taxes here are pretty high. But it kind of depends. Like I don't personally like making any judgments on movement of headquarters until we're in the moment, because that'll depend on who our funder is, what type of funding they're giving, what our burn rate would be, what we need access to. We'll definitely have offices no matter what, probably in New York City and San Francisco. We already have people working New York City for sales side and also connection side. So will be present in the big centers, but you don't actually have to have your headquarters there. And I would prefer to have it more secluded, frankly, because it gives you a lot of benefits on the burn side. The less money you spend on a building, the better. A building is a building. I don't care where you are. As long as you can fly to where you need to go, you're good.
Okay. So maybe another question. Do you have like this big internal fear that somebody will like make a better product or will grow more quickly? Like,
I mean, we're actually not the first people in the market we're in. Pulsetto is probably a lot more successful on that note, and Gamma Core, technically before they even came along. So I'm not. There will always be a new disruptive technology. The key is don't focus on your competitors because in like 90% of cases, they kill themselves. And that's the case for all startups. It's almost always an internal issue. Focus more on where you can go and learn from your competitors, learn from where they're succeeding. I would love if someone comes along and suddenly has a product that has better traction because I can learn from them and make our product have better traction along similar lines. And also, there is a very strong combinative effect in industry where right now the market share for neurotech is almost nothing because it hasn't really been expanded. Anyone that expands that market share will expand sales for everybody and revenue for everybody in the space. So it's really a win-win situation until down the line when it starts to get really crowded. In which case, that's when the competition really steps up pace. You'll probably only have one or two winners in the space.
yeah, so what's your plan to be a winner?
Well, that's what we're doing right now. We've scaled our production. We've hit a very strong center point on the need scale. There is stress is something that everyone experiences to some capacity. It's something that people really understand, and the solutions for it aren't great at the moment. There's a very strong need, so we want to focus there and grow from there. Um, we also have a very strong advantage in our technology, which we already have patents for, and we're applying more right now. And the usability aspect that we focused on in the early days is going to play out too much to our advantage because the general consumer cannot use most neurotech products. It's just the case. Most of them are just not wieldy enough. And frankly, people are too used to like the iPhone experience. And it's super simple. You take it out, you press a button. That's it.
Mhm.
Everything else there gives you directions on what to do. And that's what we built our tech around. And that's some of our big parts of strategy for becoming the winner in this industry. It really is a usability game right now for neurotech. Usability and efficacy would be the two big ones. We know we have the usability part, and based off of what we've seen, we have the efficacy part too. So it's a matter of scaling at this point.
And like, did you ever think about like going to maybe a big company and trying to like collaborate with them because like big companies, many people, a lot of stress.
Yes, 100%. And actually, we are in conversations with a couple of them. I won't mention them here because they're very early.
Mhm.
There's a lot of potential in the business to business wellness space in this market, and I actually say that's one of the biggest under 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 actualized verticals for wellness, whether neurotech or otherwise, is businesses, and they're very much looking for different technologies and products to help build out the, how would I say this? Basically, increase productivity. They're looking for a lot of products to do that, whether directly or indirectly.
Yeah, like for sure, I've seen this trend that big companies like try to at least like officially sell the idea that they care about work-life balance. So maybe yeah, that plays a little bit into
It's
that.
it's not about work-life balance. I want to make something clear here, at least a lot in the business perspective for wellness. On our side, we are selling the products to help people feel better. We want them to feel better. But if you're talking about the buyer side for businesses, it's all about productivity. Workers that aren't stressed out of their mind make better decisions and are going to lead to a better bottom line. And when you pitch these businesses on this too, you do not pitch them on your workers are going to feel so much better. You pitch them on you're going to see around a 20%
Mm.
increase in performance because your workers are less stressed. And that's going to lead into around a maybe depending on who you're talking to, upwards between $10 to $30 billion gain on a year by year. So definitely do this. Because it's always the finance guys, they're the ones that hold the reins on the decisions made on these kind of things, and that's their language, is more money.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense actually. Um, yes, maybe one last question. Like, how do you fight those day-to-day superstitions around neurotech? Like, for example, we use EEG devices, and like first, like people think that we are actually upgrading their minds, or we'll destroy their minds. So,
It's a language barrier. Remember, it's a language barrier. So we used to have a lot of those issues back when, personally, when my language wasn't refined. Remember, you got to make yourself the expert, and then you have to make yourself the unexpert. Caveman talk
yeah.
is what you're gonna have to go with. If a 5-year-old can't understand what you're saying, they're gonna start thinking it's some sort of sci-fi thing that's gonna kill them. In our case, it's a headset. You put it on, it makes you feel calmer. That's all we do. It's a headset. You put it on, it's gonna tell you how you're feeling. It's kind of like a mood ring, but with your brain.
Mhm.
There you go. People aren't going to really question that as often. There's always going to be some aversion to tech, and that's just part of the game. But it's really a language thing. If you're seeing it very commonly, like if you're seeing it over like a 5 to 10% of people are having that issue, then it's a language issue. If it's around 5 to 10%, they're just late adopters on the curve. They don't adopt early technologies at all, and which is fine. Those aren't the people you want to be talking to in the first place, so you really shouldn't care too much.
Mhm.
Um, but if they are early on the curve and they're having issues with that, or if they're like a little maybe mid on the curve, and you're seeing like a 30 to 40% that are saying that, it's how you're communicating it. If you see less than that, it's probably just you're talking to the wrong people.
Well, I don't think that we have any more questions.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And if people ever want to get in touch, you're welcome to email me at hacker at neurgear.com, or check us out at zenbud.health. That's zenbud.health. If you just look up Zenbud, we're the first result.
okay, so I think that we can like thank everybody for coming, and thank you very much. And I will end stream now. So.